I guess I should start with the noise. Because before the silence, there was always the noise. It was the soundtrack to my life, the unwelcome bass line to my quiet, single-person existence in suburban Ohio. My house is a modest little ranch style, a carbon copy of the one next to it, and the one next to that. The kind of place you buy when you want predictable and safe. And next door lived the Hendersons. They were the opposite of predictable and safe. They were pure, unadulterated chaos, compressed into a 1,500 square foot box. There was Mark, the dad, whose voice had two settings: a low, grumbling murmur you could feel through the walls, or a full-throated roar, usually directed at a football game or his lawnmower. There was Brenda, the mom, whose voice was a sharp, high-pitched staccato that could cut through concrete, mostly used for yelling the kids' names. And then there were the kids, Liam and Chloe, ages probably 7 and 5. They were the main symphony. Their contribution to the neighborhood soundscape was a constant medley of shrieking, laughing, crying, and the rhythmic, maddening thump-thump-thump of some kind of ball being slammed against the shared wall of our garages. Every morning, like clockwork, my day would begin not with my alarm, but with the shriek of, "Liam, get down from there!" Followed by a crash. My workday, I'm a freelance copy editor, so my home is my office, was punctuated by the blare of their TV playing cartoons at a volume that suggested they thought the entire block was interested in the adventures of some talking sponge. Afternoons were for fighting. The kids would fight over toys. Mark and Brenda would fight over things I never quite caught but always involved money or whose turn it was to do something. It was an endless, rolling tide of domestic noise. I'm not trying to say I hated them. Not really. I mean, I didn't know them beyond the occasional wave as Mark mowed his lawn in angry, straight lines, or a forced smile from Brenda as she wrestled grocery bags and a screaming Chloe out of the minivan. But their noise, God, their noise, it was like a constant, low-grade fever. You learn to live with it, but it's always there, draining your energy, fraying your nerves. I'd sit at my desk, trying to focus on a dry manuscript about agricultural subsidies, and all I could hear was, "I'm telling Mom," followed by the sound of a door slamming so hard my own windows would rattle. I bought noise-canceling headphones. They helped, but I could still feel the vibrations. It was a Tuesday when it stopped. I woke up on my own. No alarm, no screaming. Just the gentle, filtered light of morning coming through my blinds. I lay there for a minute, feeling off. Something was missing. It was like when the power goes out and you don't realize it's the hum of the refrigerator you're missing until it's gone. The air was still. It was heavy with quiet. I got up, made coffee, and sat at my kitchen table. Nothing. Not a single sound from the Henderson house. Their cars, the minivan and Mark's beat-up Ford pickup, were both in the driveway where they always were. But there was no morning cartoon blare, no scramble to get ready for school. Just silence. My first thought, I'm almost ashamed to admit, was pure, unadulterated relief. It felt like a gift from the universe. A snow day for my ears. I opened my laptop and started working, and it was glorious. The words on the page were clear. My thoughts were linear. I could hear the click of my own keyboard, the soft whir of my computer's fan. I didn't even put my headphones on. Around noon, I took a break and stood by the window, sipping my coffee. The Henderson house was a fortress of stillness. Curtains drawn, just as they always were. The basketball hoop over their garage door stood silent vigil, no one attempting to sink a shot. They must have gone on a trip, I murmured to myself. A surprise vacation. Good for them. It was the only logical explanation. Maybe they'd left early, before I woke up, taking a different car to the airport. It made sense. The rest of the day was bliss. I finished my work project 2 hours ahead of schedule. I sat on my back porch and read a book, an actual physical book, without a single interruption. The only sounds were the distant drone of a plane overhead and the chirping of sparrows in my oak tree. It was the idyllic suburban peace I'd always imagined when I bought the house, a peace I'd started to believe was a myth. That evening, I made myself a nice dinner, something that required more effort than just throwing a frozen meal in the microwave. I ate at my dining room table, a thing I rarely did, and I put on some soft jazz. I felt civilized. I felt calm. The constant tension in my shoulders, a tension I hadn't even been fully aware of, had melted away. This is what normal feels like, I thought. As the sun went down, the street lights flickered on, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns. The day of silence was coming to a close. I went through my nightly routine, washing dishes, brushing my teeth, triple checking that the front door was locked. It's just a habit, a city habit that I never shook even out here in the suburbs. Before heading to bed, I walked into my living room, the one that faces their house, and peeked through the blinds. And that's when I saw it. The first wrong note in my perfect, silent symphony. Through a small gap in their living room curtains, light was on. It wasn't a bright, someone is home, kind of light. It was a single, soft lamp, casting a muted yellow glow. It was just sitting there, illuminating an empty room. I stood there for a long time, just looking. The minivan was still there. The pickup truck was still there. And the light was on. My brain immediately started trying to fix the discrepancy. Okay, so they went on vacation. People leave a light on when they go on vacation. It's a security thing, makes it look like someone's home to deter burglars. A lot of people use timers for that exact reason. It was perfectly normal, but a part of my mind, the part that had been basking in the quiet all day, felt a tiny prickle of unease. They were so chaotic, so disorganized. The Hendersons didn't strike me as the type to pre-plan things like light timers for a vacation. Their lives, from what I could gather through the walls, were a series of small, frantic emergencies. Planning ahead seemed outside their skill set. I tried to shake it off. I was overthinking it. Of course they used a timer. Or maybe they just forgot to turn it off in their rush to leave. That seemed much more likely, actually. In the chaos of packing up 2 kids and herding them out the door at 5 in the morning, Brenda or Mark had simply forgotten to flick a switch. That was it. That had to be it. Satisfied with my own logic, I let the blind fall back into place. I went to my bedroom, slid under the covers, and reveled in the profound, deep silence of the house. No TV, no arguing, no late-night thumps from next door. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely and utterly alone in my own home. And at that moment, it felt like peace. Looking back on it now, I had no idea how wrong I was. It wasn't peace. It was just the deep, quiet breath before the scream. The second day of silence started much like the first, with me waking up on my own. No shrieking, no crashes. But this time, the quiet didn't feel like a gift. It felt heavy. It was a thick, syrupy silence that coated everything. The feeling of relief from the day before had curdled overnight into a low-grade unease, like the taste of soured milk at the back of your throat. I kept telling myself I was being ridiculous. They were on vacation, that's all. And I was just so used to their noise that the absence of it was messing with my head. I made my coffee and, out of habit, went to the living room window. Their house was exactly as it had been. The minivan, the pickup, the drawn curtains. A perfect, still life painting of suburban life. As I stood there, I saw the paperboy on his bike, a teenager with headphones on, completely oblivious to the world. He cycled down the street, and with a practiced flick of his wrist, sent a rolled-up, plastic-wrapped newspaper sailing through the air. It landed with a soft whomp on the Hendersons' driveway, just a few feet from the one he delivered yesterday. 2 newspapers, lying there side by side. Okay, that was fine, perfectly fine. If you leave for a spontaneous trip, you might forget to cancel the paper delivery. It happens. It's a small detail. I repeated that to myself a few times. It's a small detail, but my eyes kept being drawn back to them. 2 identical plastic-wrapped tubes, looking like evidence markers at a crime scene. I tried to work. I really did. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the same manuscript about agricultural subsidies. But the words just swam in front of my eyes. The silence from next door was louder than their noise had ever been. It was an active silence, a presence. It pushed against my windows, seeped through the walls. Every creak of my own house, every hum from my refrigerator, sounded amplified and unnatural in the vacuum they had left behind. I couldn't focus. I kept finding myself walking back to the window, peeking through the blinds like some nosy neighborhood watch lady. The cars were still there. The newspapers were still there. Nothing had changed. Around 1 in the afternoon, the mail truck came. I watched our mailman, a cheerful guy named Dave with a big, bushy mustache, do his route. He got to the Hendersons' house, opened their mailbox, and tried to shove a stack of letters inside. It was already full from the day before. He tried to jam them in, grunted with a bit of effort, and a few envelopes slipped from his grasp, fluttering down to rest on the concrete porch step near the front door. He looked at them for a second, shrugged, and moved on. What else could he do? And I just stood there, my coffee now cold in my hands. the 2 newspapers, the overflowing mailbox, the letters scattered on the porch. These weren't just overlooked details anymore. This was tangible proof, proof that for at least 48 hours, not a single person had crossed that threshold. Not once, but the cars were still there. Mark's rusty Ford was his pride and joy. He wouldn't leave it behind unless he was being dragged away. And Brenda's minivan was like a 5th member of their family. They couldn't have gone anywhere without at least one of them. The logic of it just fell apart in my head. A person cannot be in 2 states at once. They can't be both gone and home. My brain, which loves order and sense, felt like it was short-circuiting. The knot of unease in my stomach tightened. The blissful quiet was now officially a source of dread. I spent the rest of the day unable to shake the feeling that I was living next to a ghost house, a hollowed-out replica of a home. That night, the single lamp in their living room was on again, casting the same lonely, yellow glow. It didn't feel like a security measure anymore. It felt like a stage light, illuminating an empty set. The 3rd day was when the quiet became unbearable. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The very first thing I did was go to the window. The scene was the same, only worse. Now there were 3 newspapers. The little pile of mail on the porch had been joined by a colorful pizza flyer someone had stuck in the door. It was a small but growing shrine to abandonment, right there in plain sight on this perfectly manicured street. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just weird, it was wrong. My mind started racing through dark possibilities. An accident? A medical emergency? Carbon monoxide poisoning? I had to do something. Sitting here, spying through the blinds, was useless and, frankly, a little creepy. Action was needed. My hands felt cold and clammy as I picked up my phone. I had Brenda's number. We'd exchanged it a year ago after one of the kids, Liam I think, had kicked a soccer ball so hard it had cracked one of my garden gnomes. She'd been mortified and insistent that I have her number in case anything like that happened again. I'd never used it. I found her name in my contacts, Brenda Henderson. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long, long moment. What was I going to say? Hi, Brenda, it's your neighbor. You guys have been so quiet it's starting to freak me out. It sounded insane, but the alternative, doing nothing, just watching the mail pile up, felt worse. I took a deep breath and pressed the screen. The phone started ringing in my ear, a standard, electronic tone. I waited, and I listened. 1 ring, 2 rings. It rang a 3rd time, and a 4th. I pictured her phone, sitting on a kitchen counter or lost in the depths of her purse somewhere in that silent house. Just ringing. 5 rings. 6. My own heart started to pound in time with the beeps. Just pick up, I thought. Pick up and yell at your kids or tell me to mind my own business. Say something. 7 rings. 8. The call didn't go to voicemail. That was the most unnerving part. Most people's phones go to voicemail after 4 or 5 rings. Hers just kept going. It rang and rang, a monotonous, digital pulse into a complete and utter void. It felt like I was calling a dead line, a number that had been disconnected from reality itself. After the 12th ring, my nerve broke. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I hung up, my hands shaking slightly. The silence that rushed back in after I ended the call was deafening. The failed call had confirmed my deepest fears. Something was terribly wrong. The contradictions were piling up into an impossible, terrifying mountain. The cars were home, but the people were gone. A light was on, but the house was dead. The phone was ringing, but nobody was there to answer it. I spent the rest of the evening on edge, every little sound in my own house making me jump. The sun went down, and the streetlights flickered on. I found myself back at the living room window, a reluctant sentinel staring at the Henderson house, which was now just a dark shape against the twilight sky. I was watching the window where the lamp was supposed to be, waiting for it to turn on, needing that one little, illogical sign of life. And then it happened. Just as the last bit of daylight faded, the window where the living room lamp always shone remained dark. My stomach dropped. So, the timer was broken. Or the bulb burned out. Or, whatever rationalization my brain could scramble to find. I stood there, holding my breath, staring into the blackness. Then I saw it. The darkness in the living room window remained absolute. But a second later, a pale, soft light bloomed in a different window. An upstairs window, the window I knew belonged to the master bedroom. The light in the living room hadn't just failed to come on. It had been replaced. A cold wave washed over me, so intense it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I finally understood. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't a simple security timer someone had set for a vacation. A simple timer turns one light on and off in the same place. This was a system. A program. Living room light off. A calculated pause. Bedroom light on. It was designed to mimic the pattern of a living, breathing family settling down for the night. A carefully constructed illusion, and if someone had gone to the trouble of setting up such a deliberate, detailed fake-out, it could only mean they had something terrible to hide. The quiet from next door was no longer just an absence of noise. It was a cover, a lie, and I was the only one watching. I sat on my couch in the dark for what felt like hours. I didn't turn on a single light of my own. It felt wrong, like it would make me a target. My own house, my sanctuary, now felt like a glass box sitting next to a black hole. The single lit window in the Hendersons' master bedroom wasn't a comfort. It was a beacon of wrongness. A stage light on a play I couldn't see, but whose plot I was beginning to dread. You have to understand, the feeling had changed. This wasn't just curiosity or neighborly concern anymore. The careful, deliberate switching of the lights, living room off, bedroom on, was a lie. It was a conscious deception. And you only set up a lie that elaborate to hide something truly awful. My mind, which had been trying so hard to find rational explanations, had finally given up. Carbon monoxide poisoning doesn't rig the lights to a new schedule. A spontaneous vacation doesn't set up a system to fool the neighbors. No, this was something else. Something active, something intelligent. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I just saw that upstairs window glowing against the night sky. So I just sat there, knees pulled to my chest, wrapped in a blanket that did nothing to stop the chill seeping into my bones. The silence was the main event. It pressed in, thick and suffocating. It was so complete that the gentle hum of my own refrigerator sounded like a roaring engine. The occasional creak of my house settling felt like a gunshot. I was listening. I didn't know what for, but my entire being was coiled like a spring, every nerve ending tuned to the void next door. And that's when I heard it. It started so quietly I thought I was imagining it. A faint, tinny sound, like a single grain of sand dropping onto a tin roof. Tick. I held my breath. Nothing. I let it out slowly, telling myself it was nothing. My house was old. The wind was picking up. Then it came again. Tick. And again. Tick. A pause. Tick. It wasn't random. It had a rhythm. Faint, but undeniable. I unfolded myself from the couch, my joints protesting. I crept across my living room floor, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. The sound was coming from the wall. The shared wall, the one that separated my quiet, terrified life from whatever was happening in theirs. I stood there for a full minute, just listening. The sound was clearer now. It wasn't a tick, really. It was more of a cash. A dry, hollow little sound. Cash, cash, cash. It was slow, but it was as steady as a heartbeat. No, not a heartbeat. A heartbeat has life in it, a natural ebb and flow. This was different. This was mechanical. It was the sound of a metronome, if the metronome was made of something old and brittle. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, fleshy drumbeat against the cold, precise rhythm coming through the wall. I knew it was a stupid idea, the kind of thing you see people do in horror movies right before something terrible happens. But I had to. I couldn't not know. I knelt down, the cold of the floor seeping through the knees of my pajamas. I pressed my ear flat against the dry wall. The paint was cool and slightly rough against my skin. I closed my eyes, and the sound bloomed. Cash, cash, cash. It was right there, on the other side of this thin layer of plaster and insulation. It was coming from their living room, I was sure of it. Low to the ground, it was the sound of a fingernail, maybe, tapping methodically on a wooden floor. Or perhaps something being assembled, piece by minuscule piece. A tiny gear clicking into place. Over and over again. Cash, cash, cash. I pulled my head back as if the wall had burned me. My breath hitched in my throat. This was infinitely worse than the shouting. The shouting, the crying, the loud TV, that was human. It was messy and annoying, but it was the sound of life. This was the sound of its absence. It was the sound of a process. A patient, unfeeling, automated task being carried out in a house that was supposed to be empty. My mind raced, trying to build a picture around the sound. I saw a single, bare bulb hanging from a wire, illuminating a figure hunched over on the floor. I couldn't see a face, just a shape. What was it doing? Polishing something? Sorting something? Taking something apart? My imagination supplied 100 terrible answers, each one worse than the last. Was it a bomb? Was someone patiently setting the timing mechanism? Was it someone cleaning their fingernails with a small metal tool, over and over again, after doing something unspeakable? The sound was a violation. It burrowed into my ear, into my brain. It was a sound that had no business existing in the dead of night in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was an alien sound, a sound from a place where normal rules didn't apply. I scrambled back to the couch, my sanctuary, but it offered no comfort. I could still hear it, even from across the room. A faint, maddening pulse. Cash, cash, cash. It was like a form of torture. It was too quiet to be a real, overt threat, but it was too persistent to ignore. It just drilled into the silence, a constant reminder that I was not alone. Someone, or something, was awake next door, and it was busy. I looked at my phone. 2:17 a.m. I sat there, frozen, a prisoner in my own home. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? Hello, officer? My neighbors are being too quiet, and now I hear a tiny, rhythmic tapping sound. They'd think I was a lunatic. They'd tell me to go to bed. I had no proof of anything, just a stack of newspapers, some mail, and a sound that could be anything. A broken clock, a dripping faucet hitting a metal sink in a weird way, a wind-up toy one of the kids had left on. My brain offered up these pathetic, flimsy explanations, and my gut shot every single one of them down. A clock doesn't sound that dry. A drip isn't that precise. A wind-up toy eventually runs down. This didn't run down. Cash, cash, cash. It just went on, for minutes that stretched into an eternity. The house across the street was dark. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows. The entire world seemed to be asleep, except for me and whatever was making that sound. We were the only two things awake in the universe, locked in this strange, one-sided conversation. I must have stared at the wall for half an hour, unblinking. The sound had become a part of the room's atmosphere. It was as constant as the hum of the fridge had been earlier. My fear had cooled from a hot panic into a cold, hard stone of dread in my stomach. The question was no longer if something was wrong. The question was what terrible, patient thing was happening just 50 feet away from me. I glanced at my phone again. 3:05 a.m. It had been going for nearly an hour. The same rhythm, the same volume, the same dry, empty cash. It had not faltered once. And then, it stopped. It didn't fade out. It didn't slow down. It just ceased. In the middle of a beat. One moment there was cash, cash, and the next, there was nothing. The silence that rushed back in was a physical thing. It was heavier than before, deeper. It was a silence that was defined by the sound that was no longer there. I stayed absolutely still, my ears straining, listening for a footstep, a cough, a door opening. Anything. There was nothing, just the profound, absolute, and terrifying silence. I didn't feel relief. I felt a new wave of terror, sharper and more potent than anything before. The sound, as horrifying as it was a known quantity. It was a process. Its sudden absence could only mean one thing. Whatever was making that noise, it had just finished its work. The end of that sound was louder than the sound itself. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. It was full of the question of why the noise had stopped. My entire body was a single, tightly wound nerve, listening. My ears were straining so hard they actually hurt, trying to catch a breath, a shuffle, a door closing. Anything to signal what came next. There was nothing, just the deep, suffocating quiet of a house that had finished its task. I didn't move from the couch. I couldn't. My legs felt like they were bolted to the floor. The new silence was a presence in the room, a heavy blanket pressing down on me. Before, with the tapping, I was a listener to a secret. Now, I was just a woman sitting in the dark, next to a place where something awful had concluded. Relief was the furthest thing from my mind. This was the calm after the storm, and I had a sickening feeling that I was standing in the wreckage. I just couldn't see it yet. My mind, which had been racing with terrifying possibilities, just went blank. It was overload. It was like a circuit breaker had flipped. I just sat there, staring at the shared wall, my vision unfocused. My heart was still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a wild animal trapped in a cage. It was the only sound in the world. And that's when it hit me. Not in a flash of brilliance, but in a slow, desperate crawl of an idea. The camera. Months ago, after a couple of packages went missing from my porch, I bought one of those cheap little security cameras. The kind that looks like a high-tech doorbell. It wasn't much, just a fisheye lens that covered my front steps and a slice of the street. I'd installed it, tested it, and then mostly forgot about it. It was for package thieves, not for this. The app was still on my phone, buried in a folder I never opened. My hands were shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to unlock my phone. My thumb kept slipping on the screen. I finally found the little icon for the app, a stylized blue eye, and tapped it. It took a lifetime to load, the little wheel spinning and spinning. Come on, come on. When the live feed finally popped up, it just showed my empty porch, ghostly and weird under the sodium glow of the streetlights. Pointless. The action wasn't here, but it had a feature to review past recordings. It saved clips whenever it detected motion. My heart gave a painful lurch. I tapped the history tab. My finger, still trembling, scrolled back. 1 day, 2 days, 3. I stopped on the evening the Hendersons had last made a sound. The last day of normal. My thumb hovered over the timestamp, around 6:30 p.m. I held my breath and pressed play. The video was a little grainy, the colors washed out, but it was clear enough. There was their minivan, pulling into the driveway just like it always did. The side door slid open and the 2 kids, Timmy and Maya, practically fell out, shouting about something. Tom got out of the driver's side, looking tired, same as always. Sarah was already on the passenger side, wrestling with a couple of grocery bags. It was so painfully, terribly normal. A snapshot from a life that, just 72 hours later, had apparently ceased to exist. I watched them walk up the path, Tom fumbling with the keys, the kids chasing each other onto the porch. They all went inside. The door closed. I kept watching. 10 minutes passed. The street was quiet. Then, a car I'd never seen before pulled up to the curb. It was a dark sedan, an older model, a bit beat up. And I noticed it immediately, a detail that made the hair on my arms stand on end. There was no license plate. Just a blank, empty rectangle on the back. A man got out of the driver's side. He was tall and thin, dressed in dark pants and a dark jacket, even though it wasn't that cold out. He didn't look around. He didn't hesitate. He just walked up the path to the Hendersons' front door with a calm, deliberate stride, like he was expected. He didn't knock. He just opened the door, which they must have left unlocked, and stepped inside. He closed the door gently behind him. My blood ran cold. I rewound it, watched it again. The casualness was the most terrifying part. There was no struggle, no rush. He walked into that house like he was coming home from work. My mind tried to supply answers. A relative I'd never seen? A friend? A repairman? But none of it felt right. Not with the plateless car. Not with the way he moved. With a thick sense of dread, I started scrubbing forward through the timeline. The app showed thumbnails of each motion-triggered event. The mail carrier arriving the next morning, pushing mail through the slot. The newspaper kid flinging the paper onto the lawn. Another day passed in a series of sped-up, jerky clips of sunlight and shadows racing across my lawn. The second newspaper landed next to the first. A pizza delivery flyer was stuck to the door, but the door itself never opened. Not once. No Hendersons. Not Tom, not Sarah, not the kids. Not even for a second. And not the man in the dark jacket, either. They all went in. Nobody came out. It was like the house had just swallowed them whole. The car without the license plate was gone, I realized. I scrubbed back. It had driven away about an hour after the man went inside. He hadn't been in it. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't some family emergency. This wasn't a vacation. This was something else. This was tangible proof, right here on the screen of my phone, that my deepest, darkest fears weren't just in my head. My hands were ice cold now, my breathing shallow. I had to know. I had to see the footage from tonight. From when I heard the tapping. I scrolled to the recordings from just an hour ago. There was a clip, time-stamped 2:18 a.m., the same time the sound had started. I tapped it. My breath hitched in my throat. The live feed wasn't sensitive enough to trigger a recording from inside the house, but it didn't have to. Because the motion that triggered it was on the Hendersons' porch. The man in the dark jacket was standing there. He had come out of the front door. He was just standing on their top step, perfectly still. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't looking up at the sky or down at his feet. He was looking directly across the street, directly at my house, at my living room window where I had been sitting in the dark. My heart stopped. I mean it, it felt like it literally stopped beating for a second. He just stood there. He wasn't moving a muscle. He was like a statue, a scarecrow filled with something other than straw. Just a dark shape, standing and watching. His face was a pale, expressionless blur in the low-resolution video, but I could feel his gaze. It was a physical sensation, even through the screen, even through time. It felt like two icy needles drilling right into me. I checked the clip's duration. 15 minutes. He had stood there, unmoving, staring at my house for 15 solid minutes. The entire time that I had been kneeling on my floor, with my ear pressed to the wall, listening to that god-awful tapping, he had been standing right there. Watching. He must have known I was awake. He must have known I was listening. The thought was paralyzing. This wasn't random. The light show, the silence, it wasn't just to hide what happened to the Hendersons. It was a performance, and I was the audience. No, I wasn't the audience. The word popped into my head, cold and sharp and undeniable. I was the next act. He didn't just happen to look over. He was studying my house. He was patient, that patient, mechanical tapping, and now this patient, unblinking surveillance. It was the same energy. Cold, methodical, inhuman. At the end of the 15-minute clip, he turned around with that same deliberate, unhurried motion, went back inside the Hendersons' house, and closed the door, leaving the world in silence again. That was when the tapping had stopped. It stopped the moment he went back inside, because the work he was doing, it wasn't inside that house. It was a preparation. For me, I dropped the phone onto the couch cushion as if it had burned me. I couldn't breathe. The air in my lungs had turned to cement. My own living room, my sanctuary, felt like a cage. A glass display case. Every window was a gaping eye. The wall wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a thin, meaningless curtain between me and him. He wasn't just a threat next door. He was a threat aimed directly at me. He knew I was here. He knew I was alone. He had watched me. He had finished whatever he was doing. And now he was just waiting. I sat there, frozen, for how long I don't know. My mind was just a loop of his motionless figure on the screen. The man on the porch. The man staring. The tapping. The silence. It all clicked together into a single, terrifying picture of intent. I needed to call the police. Right now, I needed to tell them everything. The quiet, the male, the man on the camera. They couldn't dismiss this. This was proof. I reached for my phone again, my fingers clumsy. My plan was to dial 911. My thumb was hovering over the keypad. But then the screen lit up on its own. A notification banner slid down from the top, stark and white against my dark screen. It was from the security camera app. The text was simple, electronic, and the most horrifying thing I have ever read in my life. Motion detected at your front door, live. My phone screen went white. That notification banner, it felt less like a piece of text and more like a physical blow. Motion detected at your front door, live. I didn't click it. My thumb, the one that had been so clumsy just moments before, was now frozen solid a centimeter above the glass. My blood didn't run cold. It just stopped. Everything stopped. My breathing, my heart, the flow of time itself. He wasn't on the porch anymore. He was at my door. The thought was so huge, so impossible, that my brain simply refused to process it. It was like trying to look at the sun. I had to look away, had to find a smaller, more manageable piece of the horror to focus on. But there wasn't one. The man from the video. The man who had been watching. The man who had been inside that silent, dead house. He was here, now. My own body betrayed me. A tremor started in my hand and ran up my arm, a violent, uncontrollable shudder. The phone slipped from my grasp and hit the soft couch cushion with a dull, muffled thud. The sound was pathetic, insignificant, but in the crushing silence of my house, it was a gunshot. I flinched, clamping my other hand over my mouth, convinced he must have heard it. Convinced he was already listening. I had to see. I couldn't not see. It was the only thing in the world that mattered. Reaching out with a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else, I fumbled for the phone. I finally managed to tap the glowing white banner. The app launched. The little blue eye spun and spun. It had never felt so slow. It was an eternity of loading, an eternity where he could have been doing anything. And then the live feed appeared. It was my porch, empty, the worn-out welcome mat, the pot with the dead ferns I kept meaning to replace, the street light casting long, weird shadows. But no person, nothing. For a single, stupid, beautiful second, relief washed over me. It was so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. It was a false alarm. A glitch. A moth flying past the lens. A car's headlights sweeping across the sensor. A mistake. Thank God, it was a mistake. My lungs, which had been squeezed tight in a vice, finally drew in a ragged, desperate breath of air. And that's when I heard it. It wasn't a loud noise. It was the opposite of loud. It was a rustle, a soft, dry shish sound, right outside the living room window to my left. It was the sound of fabric brushing against the prickly shrubs I'd planted under the sill. My head snapped in the direction of the sound. The relief I'd felt just a moment ago curdled into something far worse than the fear from before. This was a new kind of terror. He wasn't at the front door. He was right there, maybe 10 feet away, separated from me only by a thin pane of glass and a flimsy curtain. He had moved. He had seen the front door was a blind spot from inside the house, so he had moved. He was being smart, methodical. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. I couldn't look. I was convinced that if I pulled back the curtain, his face would be right there, pale and waiting in the dark. So I did the only thing I could. I looked back down at my phone. My eyes were glued to the little screen, this tiny, glowing window that was somehow safer than looking out my own. I was watching my empty front porch on a live feed, while the man who was supposed to be there was standing just a few feet to my left, out of the camera's view. The absurdity of it was insane. My mind raced. What was he doing? Just listening? Waiting? I was a fish in a bowl, and he was tapping on the glass. And then, he moved back into the frame. He didn't walk. He just appeared. One moment the porch was empty, the next, his dark, thin shape was standing there, right in the center of the screen. He was closer now, directly in front of the door. He wasn't looking at the camera. He wasn't looking at the window. He was looking at the lock. He raised a hand, and in it, I saw a thin, metallic object. It was long and slender, glinting dully in the weak porch light. A lockpick set. I've only ever seen them in movies, but I knew what it was instantly. It wasn't a key. It was a tool for entering places you're not meant to be. He moved with a terrifying calm. There was no haste, no frantic fumbling of a clumsy burglar. He moved like a surgeon or a watchmaker. He inserted one of the thin metal pieces into my lock, then another, and he began to work. His head was tilted slightly, as if he were listening to the tumblers. His entire posture was one of intense, unhurried focus. Like this was his job, a task to be completed. I couldn't scream. My throat had closed up completely. The air was trapped in my lungs. All I could do was watch the tiny, grainy image of this man on my phone. This stranger who had come from a silent house, patiently and skillfully unmaking the only thing keeping him out. My entire world, my entire sense of safety, was being dismantled, pin by tiny pin, right in front of my eyes. Every scrape of the metal inside the lock, though I couldn't actually hear it, I could feel it. It echoed in the bones of my skull. It was the sound of my life ending. I should have been running. I should have been calling the police. I should have been screaming my lungs out. But I was paralyzed. I was an animal caught in the headlights, mesmerized by my own destruction. My mind was just a loop of a single, desperate thought. This isn't real. This can't be real. And then, something else happened. Something that shattered the paralysis and plunged me into a new dimension of panic. My phone, the very device I was clutching like a lifeline, erupted. It didn't just ring. It exploded with noise and vibration, a violent, sudden assault on the silence. I yelped, a strangled, pathetic sound, and dropped it again. It fell onto the sofa, screen up, buzzing and vibrating against the cushions like a trapped, furious insect. The screen was lit up. Bright, clinical, and white. Unknown number. The call was coming from inside the house. No, that's not right. The phone was in the house. The call was coming from, where? From who? It didn't matter. The implication was immediate and unbearable. It was him. It had to be him. He was picking my lock, and he was calling me. Why? To hear my panic? To tell me he was coming? Was this part of the game? The performance? I stared at the vibrating phone, at the unknown number pulsating on the screen. It was the most malevolent thing I had ever seen. The cheerful, generic ringtone I'd never bothered to change was now the soundtrack to a nightmare. Burring, burring. It was so loud, inhumanly loud, a klaxon of doom in my tiny, silent living room. I couldn't touch it. I couldn't answer it. I couldn't decline it. It just lay there, screeching at me, A second front in a war one was already losing. My senses were overloaded. The sight of the man on the porch, a silent horror movie playing on a tiny screen. The sound of the phone, a relentless shriek that filled every corner of the room. The feeling of the house's foundation vibrating with my own frantic heartbeat. It was too much. Amid the chaos of the ringing, I heard another sound. It was small, but it cut through the noise of the phone like a razor. It came from the front door. A dry, sharp, final sound. Click. The ringing didn't matter anymore. Nothing mattered anymore. The sound was absolute. It was the sound of a barrier ceasing to exist. The sound of a lock giving up. The sound of invitation. Silence. The ringing phone chose that exact moment to give up. The call went to voicemail. And the quiet that fell in its place was the most terrifying thing I had ever experienced. It was a listening silence. A waiting silence. It was the silence of a held breath. My own and someone else's. I was still staring at the phone, at the now dark screen, when my eyes caught the motion on the live feed again. He was no longer on the porch. The porch was empty once more. He wasn't on the porch because he didn't need to be. Then came the last sound. A slow, quiet groan. The sound of old wood complaining as weight was put against it. The unmistakable, stomach-turning creak of my own front door, swinging inward into the darkness of my hallway. He was inside. The sound of the door. That's what broke the spell. It wasn't loud, just a low groan of old wood, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times but never like this. It was the sound of my world splitting open. For a half second, my body and brain were still two separate, useless things. My brain was screaming, a silent, high-pitched wail of pure static. My body was a statue made of ice. But then, something deep and old, something primal that I didn't know I had, took over. It wasn't a thought, it was just a command. Move. I didn't run, I didn't scramble. My body unfolded from the couch in one jerky, unnatural motion, like a puppet whose strings had just been yanked. My bare feet made no sound on the hardwood floor. I almost fell, my balance shot to hell, but I caught myself on the arm of a chair. The only thing in my mind was a single image, a lock. The little push-button lock on the bathroom door. It was flimsy, probably wouldn't stop a determined child, but right now, it felt like the strongest fortress in the world. I moved through the short hallway that led from the living room. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. He was in the entryway, just around the corner. I could feel his presence like a drop in temperature. I could smell it, too, a faint, metallic, and cold scent, like damp earth and old tools. I didn't dare breathe. Each step was a gamble, a prayer that the floorboards wouldn't betray me with a creak. I made it. My hand found the cold brass of the bathroom doorknob. I slipped inside, closing the door as gently as if it were made of glass. My thumb fumbled for the lock. It wouldn't push in. My hand was shaking so violently that I couldn't get the angle right. It was a stupid, simple mechanism, and my terror was making it impossible. Come on, come on, come on, my brain chanted. I pressed again, with both thumbs, my whole body shaking, and finally, it clicked into place. The sound was tiny, but to me, it was as loud as a gunshot. I didn't stop there. I stumbled backward, away from the door, my legs hitting the hard edge of the bathtub. I practically fell into it, curling up into a ball on the cold, non-slip surface. It was the furthest point in the room from the door, the most hidden corner. I pulled the cheap plastic shower curtain closed around me. The vinyl stuck to my sweaty skin. I was hiding in a bathtub, in my own house, like a little kid. The absurdity of it was a fleeting, hysterical thought that was immediately swallowed by fear. My phone, it was still in my hand. I'd somehow managed to hang onto it through the whole mad dash. The screen was dark. I squinted, my eyes slowly adjusting to the near-total darkness of the windowless bathroom. I could see the missed call notification. Unknown number. It looked like an artifact from another lifetime. My fingers, still trembling but now with a single, desperate purpose, slid across the screen. I swiped the notification away. I hit the phone icon. My recent calls list was pathetic. Mom, my boss, the pizza place. And at the very top, the keypad. I stabbed at the numbers. 911. My finger hovered over the green call button. What if he heard? What if the sound of the call connecting, even the quietest digital chirp, gave me away? But what other choice did I have? I pressed it. There was no ringing, just a half second of silence, and then a woman's voice, calm and impossibly distant. 911, what is your emergency? My own voice wouldn't work. My throat was a knot. I tried to speak, and only a dry, rasping sound came out. Ma'am, I have your location at 1422 Sycamore Lane. Is that correct? Are you able to speak? I took a ragged, silent breath and pushed the phone tighter against my ear and mouth, trying to muffle the sound. Yes, I whispered, the word fragile and thin. Yes, that's right. What is the emergency, ma'am? Someone's in my house, I breathed, each word an effort. He just broke in. I'm hiding, in the bathroom. Okay, ma'am, stay on the line with me. Officers are on their way. Can you tell me where the intruder is? And that's when I heard it. A footstep. It was in the living room. Slow, deliberate, not the sound of someone searching. It was the sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going. I clamped my hand over my mouth, stifling a sob. Ma'am, are you still there? The operator's voice was a pinprick of sanity in my collapsing universe. I couldn't answer. I just listened. Step. A pause. Step. It was a heavy tread, but careful. The creak of a floorboard near the hallway. He was coming closer. He was moving with that same unhurried, terrifying confidence I'd seen on the camera feed. This wasn't a frantic smash and grab. This was a procedure. He's in the hall, I whispered into the phone. He's coming this way. Okay, ma'am, just stay as quiet as you can. Don't hang up. Help is on the way. They're very close. Step. He was right outside now. The floorboards just outside the bathroom door groaned under his weight. And then, silence. A profound, absolute silence that was 1,000 times worse than the footsteps. He had stopped. He was right there. A few inches of wood and dry wall separated us. I stopped breathing. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure he could hear it. I was convinced I could feel his presence through the door, a cold, predatory stillness. The silence stretched on for an eternity. He was listening, waiting for me to make a sound, to give myself away, and then, I saw it. Through the tiny gap under the door, a sliver of his shadow blotted out the faint light from the living room. He was standing perfectly still. My eyes were glued to that sliver of darkness. The 911 operator was still talking, her voice a tinny, meaningless buzz in my ear. I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was listening to the silence. And then I saw the doorknob. The old, tarnished brass knob. I saw it begin to turn. It moved with an agonizing slowness. There was no sound, no rattle. Just a smooth, silent rotation. My mind went completely blank. This was it. The flimsy lock would pop, the door would swing open, and I would see his face. It was over. I squeezed my eyes shut. Woo-ee-ee-ee. The sound was faint at first, a distant cry in the night. A siren. My eyes snapped open. The knob stopped turning. The shadow under the door didn't move. He had heard it, too. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. We were both frozen, a tableau of hunter and prey, caught by an outside sound. The siren grew louder, sharper. It was closer now, not just one, but maybe two. They were coming down my street. Fast. The shadow under the door shifted. I heard a sound, a soft exhalation. Frustration? Annoyance? I couldn't tell. Then, a fast, decisive tread moving away from the door. Not running, not yet. Just a quick, purposeful retreat. I heard the sound of the back door, the one in the kitchen, being opened. Then a soft thud as it closed. And then, nothing. The sirens were screaming now, right outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the sliver under the door, painting chaotic, strobing patterns in the dark. Heavy, pounding fists hammered on my front door. Police, open up. I still couldn't move. The operator was shouting in my ear now. Ma'am, that's the police. Can you let them in? It took me another 10 seconds to uncurl my limbs. They were stiff and cold. I stumbled out of the tub, my legs like jelly. I fumbled with the lock, my hands still shaking, and pulled the door open. I ran, not walked, to the front door, my heart still trying to hammer its way out of my chest. I twisted the deadbolt and yanked the door open. 2 police officers stood on my porch, hands on their holstered weapons, faces grim. The world rushed in, the cold night air, the strobing lights, the crackle of their radios. Ma'am, are you okay? Are you hurt? One of them asked, his eyes scanning the hallway behind me. I just shook my head, unable to form words. I leaned against the doorframe, gasping for air. More officers arrived, fanning out, clearing the house room by room. They were professional, efficient. They checked the back door, which was unlocked but closed. They swept the backyard with their powerful flashlights. He was gone, vanished into the night as if he'd never been there. It's a weird thing, having your house full of cops. You're supposed to feel safe, but it just feels wrong. Violated, like the house itself is contaminated. One of the first officers, a kind-faced man named Miller, sat with me on the couch while the others searched. He asked me questions, but my answers were a disjointed mess. The man, the camera, the silent house next door. It sounded insane, even to me. The house next door, I kept saying, my voice hoarse. The Parkers. He came from there. He's been there for 3 days. Miller just nodded patiently, but I could see the look in his eyes. The look you give a hysterical person. He was trying to calm me down. He dispatched 2 of his officers to go check on the Parker house, more to placate me, I think, than because he believed me. We'll just do a wellness check, ma'am, he said. I watched through my window as the 2 officers walked across the lawn to the Parkers' front door. They knocked. They waited. They knocked again, louder this time. They shone flashlights in the windows. After a few minutes, one of them came back. Officer Miller went out onto the porch to talk to him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see the younger officer's face under the porch light. It was confused. He kept shrugging and pointing back at the dark house. Then, they went around the back. A minute later, I saw a light go on in the Parkers' kitchen. They'd found a way in. I waited. The silence in my own house felt heavy again. Officer Miller had gone quiet, just listening to his radio. The other cops were finishing their sweep. It felt like hours passed. Finally, one of the officers who had gone next door came back. It wasn't the young one. This was a different guy, older, with a graying mustache. He walked with a strange stiffness. He didn't come to my door. He went straight to Miller, who was still on my porch. They spoke in low, urgent tones. I saw Miller's whole posture change. He stood up straight. The look of patient placation was gone, replaced by something sharp and alarmed. He looked from the other officer to the house next door, and then, slowly, his eyes found me, sitting on my couch, visible through the window. It was a look I'll never forget. It was a look of dawning horror. He came back inside, closing the door behind him. The air in the room suddenly felt cold. Ma'am, he began, his voice different now. Deeper, more serious. I need you to tell me everything again. Slowly. What is it? I asked, my own fear starting to coil in my stomach again. What did you find? Are the Parkers okay? He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Ma'am, the house is empty. Empty? What do you mean empty? Their cars are right there. I mean there's nobody in there, he said, holding up a hand. No signs of a struggle. No signs of anything. It's clean. Very clean. Too clean. The place looks like it's been professionally scrubbed. My mind couldn't process the contradiction. The cars, the lights on a timer, the silence, and the house that was scrubbed clean. It made no sense. But, what about the man? Officer Miller took a deep breath. This was the part he didn't want to say. We didn't find the intruder. But we found something else. In their living room. He paused. They had a camera set up on a tripod. A cold dread, so much worse than the panic I'd felt earlier, began to creep up my spine. A camera? A professional one, he said, his eyes not leaving mine. With a long telephoto lens. It was pointed directly at your living room window, right where you're sitting now. I went numb. I felt the blood drain from my face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He hadn't just been watching from the street. He had a dedicated observation post. For days, documenting me. And, Miller continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper, there was a notebook next to it. I just stared at him. I couldn't speak. It was a log, he said. A detailed log of your activities. What time you leave for work. What time you get home. It notes what you eat for dinner. What shows you watch on TV. Everything, down to the minute. The violation was so profound, so absolute, that I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a random attack. This was a project. I was a project. The last entry was from tonight, Miller said, his face a mask of grim duty. He pulled out his own small notepad. He clearly hadn't wanted to bring the other a notebook out of the house. He read from his own notes, his voice flat and clinical. It says, former target family processed smoothly. Preparing for new target. Tonight.